Welcome back to the Bullshit Filter. Recording this on Thursday, the 13th of May, 2021, with a guest who's come on to tell me in how many ways I'm wrong about China. Long-time Facebook friend and listener of some things that we do, Liam Bussell. Welcome
Hey,
to
Cam.
the Bullshit Filter, Liam. Have you girded your loins, sir?
I guess my loins are girded. I think I feel that category of long-time listener, first-time caller. That would be adequate,
Yeah.
accurate? Yeah, I mean, I've listened to, I listened to
Tell us.
Julius Caesar and a bunch of your shows. And when you talk about China, just as a frame of reference, I spent 15 years in China and Hong Kong. And I sort of think there's a couple of key things around how Chinese society is structured, which you maybe don't take into account of. So that's really my position.
Great. So before we get into that, you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Liam Bussell, obviously. I work in marketing communications. I work for tech companies. I went to China originally in '97. I was there for a couple of months, and then I went back in 2001, 2002, and I was doing postgraduate research. I was working mainly out of hospitals. I had a couple of interesting jobs. I taught English at the Shanghai Communist Party Recreation Center on Wulamuchi-Lu in Shanghai, which, is where the mayor and those guys went to play golf and swim, play ping pong. And they had an educational department upstairs. So I spent a lot of time in those early sort of 2000s talking to guys who were very accomplished and had gone through a lot of the Communist Party stuff. Subsequent to that, I moved into sort of financial services marketing, and I was based in Beijing for a while. So I've spoken to a lot of people who work in the banking sector, the stock market, government, and just over time, kind of building relationships and living in the place. I've sort of, I think, developed a bit of a feel for it. I'm by no means an expert. I'm not a foreign policy expert or a military expert. But, I have a pretty good, I think, understanding of how China works. Subsequent to that, I moved back to Australia. I still do the same things. I read a lot and, talk to people.
That sounds like my job description. I read a lot and talk to people. All right. So thank you for the background. Tell me what I'm wrong about, because I want to know.
Well, so, this specifically sort of kicked off, I think we were talking about, you're on Facebook, you posted around the idea of, Joe Biden expanding the military budget, China not being the guy in the wrong. And the reference, I think, was
Not
started
being
off,
the what? The
not
guy in the
being,
wrong.
yeah, the guy in the wrong, sorry. I
Right.
think, yeah, and then you were talking about nukes. And so, that led into a conversation around the Department of Energy. And so I did some notes because I knew I was talking to you. So specifically, I did some digging.
Right.
I did some digging on there's a report by the Brookings Institute, right? If you look just in a single year, they spend 6 to 7 billion essentially cleaning up, maintaining nuclear sites, right? And then they spend 19.8 billion essentially maintaining the security and efficacy of their nuclear missiles. So that's 19.8 billion.
Hold on. So
plus 7 billion.
Just clarify who they is. You're talking about.
So Department of Energy.
The U.S. Department of Energy. Yep.
So under the Department of Energy, there's an organization called the NNSA, which I couldn't tell you what the abbreviation stands for, but obviously it's the Nuclear Security Agency or something. But you look it up, it's in their federally listed budget. It's available online. But essentially 26 billion of any amount of money that they spend every year just maintains the nukes that they have. And further to that, in that when you look at the Brookings Institute a bit deeper, they say that since
the NNSA is the National Nuclear Security Administration.
Yeah.
Responsible for safeguarding national security through military application of nuclear science.
That's an awesome
national security. Safeguarding national security.
Well,
Yeah,
so if you
sure,
look at
that's
that,
what you're doing.
if you look a little bit deeper in that same Brookings report, I'll share a link afterwards if you want it. But if you look from 1940 to 1996, those are the numbers that they've got. The US has spent 5.5 trillion on the cost of nukes, um, missiles, submarines, all that sort of stuff. If you look at what actually is the cost of that 5.5 trillion in that same time period, 1940 to 1996, how much it actually cost to make the plutonium, enrich it, do all that, it's 165 billion. So 5.5 trillion, 165 billion. So the vast majority of those costs are, Los Angeles class nuclear powered attack submarines, not Trident, Atlas missile systems, all that sort of stuff. So by far and away, the majority of the money they spend is actually on the military, right? It's on how they deliver those bombs rather than making the bombs themselves. Making the bombs is cheap. Maintaining the bombs is expensive.
And firing them, so building the rockets to put the warheads in, is
Yeah.
part of that budget, from what you're saying. Oh, that's still
It's
part
part
of
of the
their nuclear arsenal, right?
5.5. It's part of their 5.5 trillion. Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is what you're talking about is what I posted on Facebook was the report that Biden, the budget that he's trying to get passed by Congress, has 715 billion specified as being set aside for the Pentagon. But there's an additional 40 odd million, 38 billion in defense spending, which, according to the report from, I think it was csis.org, says includes funding for the Department of Energy for developing and maintaining nuclear weapons, as well as money for the Maritime Administration. So there's an extra 40 odd billion dollars going to their nuclear arsenal. So all up, total defense spending, using that wonderful euphemism for military spending, is 753 billion. But what's this got to do with China, Liam?
Yeah, well, we started off, that conversation started off around, China is the enemy. And quite often when I hear you talk around that piece around China, you're quite often sort of saying, the Chinese are totally upfront about everything, and the US is kind of building them up into some sort of enemy. I think that is true, right? I don't disagree with you that the US.
Hold
Yeah,
on. Wait. Stop. Slow down. I don't think I've ever
okay,
said China's totally upfront about everything. I don't think any government in the world is totally upfront about everything. Not the
okay,
US, not China, not Russia, not Australia. My position is basically that the US and its allies, including Australia,
mm,
in the process of turning China into the new big bad that we all have to be scared of because they're coming to take our children from our beds, and as the US does at least once a year with someone around the world. It's been Russia for the last 5, 6 years. Before that, it was, I don't know, Afghanistan, Al Qaeda, ISIS, Saddam Hussein. The list is long and we all know it. Gaddafi, etc., etc. So that the drums of war are beating, and they're building up China to be an existential threat to Western civilization, and we need to spend more and more money on military preparedness in order to get ready to go to war with China.
okay. So I think there's three things in there to unpack. The first one is America always needs an enemy, right? The military industrial complex is so, like, as an octopus, so well woven into the fabric of American culture, especially politics, in terms of you're from Utah, you're an elected representative, you've got X number of jobs in your local district, which probably come from the military industrial complex. You can't wean yourself off that teat, right? And I probably
Yeah.
agree
So
with
you
you
agree
in
with
terms
that?
of, yeah, 100%. That would be the first piece. The second piece is, having lived in China and having a slightly different perspective on China, I don't think that we generally want to live in a world if China was in the US's position. I'm not saying the US is in a particularly good position as a leader of the free world. I'm doing air quotes on that because I agree with you on that as well. But I think a world where China was a very dominant power would not be ideal, right?
Why
There's
is
that
that?
old, well, I think there's that old conversation, that has come out in the last few years. It's been talked about more. If we just embrace China economically, and we open up their markets and set up factories there, that they will become more and more like us, right? And I think that that's a very kind of arrogant position to take, because I don't think the Chinese ever intended to be like us. I think it's a very
No, I agree
naive
with all that.
position to. I think there's a very naive position to take. I think there's some fundamental flaws in the way the Chinese country is structured politically, that would just continue to scale as the country and its economy and its importance continue to scale. If you look at the CCP, they've done a very good job from a propaganda position to blur the line between Chinese ethnicity and Chinese nationality, right? So those are two different things. You can have friends who are Italian and you can talk to them about, God, the Italian government's dysfunctional, and they don't take it as a personal racial insult. But the Chinese government has built those two things together, and they've built a very strong narrative around, we got screwed over in the opium wars, and China really should be at one of the top countries in the world, and we did all this stuff, and we got screwed over by the Western powers. And now it's time
Well,
for
that's
China
well,
to
that's
take its position.
and that's true. Or would you disagree with any of that?
Um, well, a little bit. I mean, yeah, they got
Did they
screwed
not get
over.
screwed over in the Opium Wars? Well, screwed
Well,
over
if
or
you,
defeated anyway. But they were
they were rife for
def.
screwing over, right, at that point in time. Like, if you look at the imperial government, Qing dynasty, as it was going at that point in time, you go to the Summer Palace in Beijing, and there's a lake. It's beautiful. And you walk around, it's really beautiful. It's one of the imperial residences. And there's a boat in one of the lakes, like a scale model boat. Well, when I say scale model, it's like a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 scale. It's a big boat. And the reason for that is the Empress Dowager at that time raised a whole bunch of money to build a navy, because to resist the Opium War and to protect Chinese power. And then through corruption, she took that money and spent it on herself. But she built one boat in a lake in her palace just to indicate that she did, in fact, know that money was allocated and earmarked for a navy. So the government that was in power at that time actually opened up those attacks a little bit, right? Like they weren't able to resist. They were massively corrupt. Selling opium in a country is a really bad thing to do. But you also have to ask, why were the people of China so desperate that they were buying opium en masse because their life was really terrible, right?
Well,
Studies of drug.
why are so many Americans buying drugs? Why are so many Australians buying drugs? People just like drugs. Drugs are good.
They are to a certain extent, but if you look at studies, I mean, I've had my experiences with drugs. I choose to avoid them these days because they don't make me very productive. But
Aren't
if
you
you look at the
puffing on a
studies,
nicotine vape there in the background, Liam?
that's a very low level. That's a very low level drug
Oh,
in the
really? A low
hierarchy of
level
drugs.
drug. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
doesn't alter my consciousness.
You don't think so?
Not really. Might wake me up a bit. Um,
Right.
yeah. So if you look at people who are isolated fall into drugs much more heavily than people who have happy, productive social lives. So I would imagine that you could probably, I mean, it's very hard to project from 100 years ago, but I think the life of the average Chinese peasant in the late 1800s was probably not ideal, right? That's
Oh,
going
well,
back to
yeah, sure.
1400s in
Hmm.
Europe or 1100s. Like, it was probably a fairly shitty life. So I think the
They got
Chinese did
worse
get
after the
screwed over.
Opium Wars, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, Chiang Kai-shek wasn't great, right? And the communists fought a very long war like that. That period of
Um,
time. Sorry, you go.
oh, I was just going to say, between the Opium Wars of like 1860 and the two revolutions being fought by the Kuomintang and the communists in the 1920s, 1930s. There's a big period there where their country was decimated by the Opium Wars and by Western imperialists, mostly Britain,
Well,
but
actually,
Russia and
I
the
would
United States got
argue
involved, France.
Chinese organizations and Chinese people historically have probably spent more time fucking each other over than they have being fucked over or fucking over other people. The Taiping
Okay,
Rebellion
but
is no.
you
I
can't
want to
yeah, but
talk
you
about the
can't
Taiping Rebellion.
justify imperialism by saying, "Oh well, we did them a
I'm not
favor." They
justifying
were.
it. I'm not justifying imperialism. I'm merely
That's
saying
like
that
the
as a
that's like the
narrative.
people that say, "Oh, come on, the Aboriginals fought themselves for 50,000 years. The
No.
white
I'm
people
talking
did
about the
them a favor."
Taiping. If you look at the Taiping Rebellion, right, which in pure numbers of people killed is third. I'm pretty sure it's third after the first two world wars, right? Something like 15 to 25 million people died. The
Right.
Taiping Rebellion was sort of based in the south of China around Chengdu area in the sort of foothills of the Himalayan mountains. And the guy who ran it was sort of a crazy guy who believed he was Jesus or the son of Jesus or Jesus reincarnated, but a Chinese guy. And
Mm.
they fought, battles. They were messing up the Chinese government for a long period of time. And in the end, it was kind of a ragtag group of mercenaries and Americans and British guys who fought them and actually sort of turned that around. But they killed like millions and millions of people, and that was just Chinese
Bloody
guys killing Chinese
Christians.
guys. So
Mm.
yeah, I think that it's not imperialism is bad, right? I think we can both agree on that. Opium is bad, but the narrative that China didn't do any of this to itself, right? It was just humming along, looking after itself, developing culture, and then along came these big bads, imperialists, and came in and they just totally screwed us. I think it was already starting to fall down anyway, right?
All
I
right.
think
So you're
those,
saying that the way that it's portrayed in China is how you just described it. So
yeah,
things were
I think
great,
that,
and then the British came in and ruined everything.
yeah, I think that's what they say. And I mean, I think the next piece, the Chiang Kai-shek early Mao Zedong piece, is really crucial, right? Like in Chinese history, and I'm not an expert on this, I've read a little bit about it, but in Chinese history, that's called like the Age of the Warlords, right? And that's because there was a guy in Shanghai and he was pretty much doing that, and the communists weren't there, and Chiang Kai-shek was back in the mountains. Like the country just fell apart, and there was gangs and little guys like warlords and dictators in different parts. And largely, other than the labels, I don't think China is significantly different now. Xi Jinping is just a very big warlord. And I think that that's a
Okay.
piece. I think that's a piece that external viewers of China who are not well versed and haven't really like read up on recent Chinese history, all those types of things. I don't think that they're aware of that, right? Like every time there's a change in the Communist Party leadership, there's a bunch of guys who just disappear, right? A lot of them are locked up. I mean, do you remember Bo Xilai? Do you remember that? 2012,
Yeah.
a guy called Bo Xilai. So Bo Xilai, his father is my favorite named Chinese Communist Party guy, Bo Yibo, that's his name. Bo Xilai he's a princeling, right? Proper princeling. Xi Jinping, to a certain extent, is also considered a princeling, but there's a lot of these guys. And if you look at the US, the Bushes, the Clintons, they're all, families that are embedded in the power structure like ticks. But in China, it's even crazier than that sort of stuff. Like Bo Xilai essentially he ran Dalian for a while, which is a fairly famous city. And then he then moved to the south and sort of took over Chongqing. And, in that period of time, he kind of ran afoul of the central government, which was a little bit before Xi Jinping. But he ran afoul of the central government, and they were just getting up to that point in time when they were going to elect Xi Jinping. And so Bo Xilai was kind of making his play to be the head of the Chinese state. And for various reasons, he ran afoul of a bunch of people. If people don't remember, just for context, I think it's 2012, it kind of blew up when a guy called Wang Lijun, who was Bo Xilai's right-hand man and chief of police, hid in the American consulate in Chengdu. Right, he ran inside, and then the Chinese government surrounded it with troops, and they were trying to get him out. And he was scared; he was in fear for his life. And the reason he was in fear for his life is because Bo Xilai's wife, or Bo Xilai had been involved in some corrupt deal, and his wife had killed an Englishman called Neil Haywood. Neil Haywood had been doing offshoring funds or something, and there'd been some falling out. And anyway, the wife poisoned him. And that was really just one of the reasons that it happened. There's a kind of an anecdotal story which I can't verify, but I've heard from a couple of different people. One of them, a journalist, is, you know, when Jiang Zemin was in charge, he or Wen Jiabao went to Chengdu. So that's the senior leader of the Communist Party and the premier, the number two, went to Chengdu. And one of the reasons Bo Xilai was very successful narratively in the Chinese media was he cracked down on crime. Chongqing had a pretty big crime problem. So this is sort of what I'm saying around the warlords phase. Like, it's all there. There's all these little government guys, and they all are running their own little thing like a Tin Pot dictator. Bo Xilai cracked down on the triads, essentially, the mafia gangs, crime gangs. And the way he did it was Wang Lijun, the guy who ran into the Chengdu embassy. He was an expert at wireless communication tapping. So they were tapping all these guys' phones, and you'd be a gangster, and you and I'd meet for a coffee, and they'd be listening to the audio coming through my microphone. So he was ruthless, ruthless. And apparently, when Wen Jiabao or Jiang Zemin, I'm not sure who, they went there as their presidential tour of the country. They were staying in whatever sort of official residence that they would stay in, and they got a call from their minding team, who are all like Beijing CCP Communist Party Special Forces guys, and they were like, someone is actually trying to tap our phones. And the person who was trying to tap their phones was Bo Xilai's local security forces. So imagine if Joe Biden went to Texas and the Texas governor tried to tap his phones, right? I mean, you would imagine there's probably a variance in the technical competence of Texas versus the Secret Service, but maybe not. But
That's
yeah,
not how
that
they
was
do
quite
it
a
in
big thing.
Texas. They just shoot you from the book depository building and blame it on some hobo. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I guess my point is, when Xi Jinping then got in, right? And if you look, this gets really funny when you realize that before he was in Chongqing, and he then had this massive downfall for, being too big for his britches. Bo Xilai was in the northeast of China, right? So he was in Dalian, that area. Do you know who came up in that area? Xi Jinping came up in that area, right? Those guys, for 20 years, those guys worked pretty much next door to one another. So they all knew one another. They would know one another professionally. That would have been, Bo Xilai made his play for the senior chair, and Xi Jinping just sort of cut him off. The guys who wanted Xi Jinping, they sort of cut him off. They were like, Bo Xilai's getting too big. So this is how China exists, right? Even to this day, Xi Jinping he's at the top, and he's eliminated a lot of the competition, but they always do this. Right? Every time there's a transfer of government, they do this. When I was in Shanghai, I taught at this school after university, and I actually met Mayor Chen, who was the mayor of Shanghai at that time. And if you look at Shanghai as a city, previous mayors of Shanghai, Zhu Rongji, Jiang Zemin, Zhang Chunqiao, who was one of the Gang of Four, right? The big Gang of Four when you talk about Mao. And look, there's a fellow called Xi Jinping. Like, that is a stepping stone moving up the Communist Party track. So this guy, Chen, he was there from like till 2007, 2008. He's one of the rare guys who properly went to jail for corruption. But largely, he's believed to have he drove a lot of that growth, right? Shanghai now is probably, the most modern city in the world. If you look at the central part of it, that's 5 million people, like Pudong, Huahailu, Nanjinglu, like the buildings there. People talk about Tokyo in the 80s and 90s. Now you go there, that's why they film Mission Impossible movies like that. Real estate wise, futuristic city wise, that's a big city. But people ignore the 20 million people who live in the suburbs around that. That was an economic miracle, right? And the Chinese Communist Party really recognized that. And so if you were the mayor of that city, that was like they were giving you control of a lot of power. And Chen, who was the mayor there, they got rid of him because technically he was kind of a different school, right? There's different, they call them schools or factions. Like, he was a slightly different faction. He wasn't a faction that was going up, so they got rid of him. But, Jiang Zemin and Xi Jinping both went through that before they got to the head of the Communist Party. So they moved these guys around. You got to tick the boxes on your government passport. But ultimately, when Xi Jinping first got in, the West ran a story around, he's cracking down on corruption. The interesting thing about that is, I was in Beijing at the time, and if you're in Beijing and you're a government guy, not like a junior, a secretary or an EA, but like you're a relatively experienced government guy. You're not a department head, but let's say two steps down from that. So you're taking meetings and writing policy and doing all that. Your salary at that time was like 4,000 RMB a month, which is, in Australian dollars or US dollars, that's like $500 a month. So it's not a lot of money. But you got lots of perks. All these people constantly took you out for dinner to try and sort of pitch ideas to you and get your buy-in. You had a driver. The Chinese government is the biggest buyer of black Audis in the history of the world. That's why Audi's so successful in China. For a period of time, you got a car. Everyone had cars. But these guys used to not have to pay for meals, right? They had lots of perks. Their salary was very low. So that kind of low-level graft is, Xi Jinping has cracked down on it from a sort of PR point of view. But that low-level graft just exists in China. It's always existed in China. And it can go up and down a little bit. It might be more prevalent, less prevalent. But that kind of idea of guanxi, which is like relationships, is very important in China, right? So if you are connected to a guy who's a deputy minister, if you can get him to do you a favor, you'll obviously have to pay him back. But that's really how China operates.
Okay, so let's
Yep.
let's pull it back a bit. I'm still trying to understand what I'm wrong about China. You keep saying
Okay.
I'm wrong on China. What am I wrong about?
So this is why I'm sort of trying to explain this stuff, is I think without an understanding of how that stuff works. Okay, so I know that you've read quite a lot of Chinese government policy stuff written in English. So taking a step back, why would the Chinese government publish any of its policy in English? I mean, there's no one in
purposes.
Only for propaganda purposes, right?
Sure.
If you look at European
Same reason
nations,
every government. Wait. It's the same reason every government publishes everything. It's all for spin. It's all
I'd
to
imagine
put,
there's legal
position
requirements.
themselves.
There's legal requirements. The US government legally has to put a published copy of a bill on a website so people can read it. There'd be a legal requirement. In Europe, if you're in the EU, you probably have to translate. I mean, the Germans probably hate it. You probably have to make an English version of your bill and put it on a website. There's a certain, I mean, it might be tenuous, but there's a certain requirement that you broadcast the decisions that you're making. For the Chinese government to do that in English, there's no requirement.
Yeah, sure. But I'm saying that most government communications to the public, everything that with Scott Morrison or Josh Frydenberg, Australian Prime Minister and Treasurer for international listeners, or Biden comes out and says something, or the press secretary comes out and says something, it's all for positioning and spin. Okay, if they're publishing their actual policies, sure, they've got a legal requirement to do so. But, okay, so yeah, Chinese government puts out propaganda for foreign people to read. So what?
So
you're saying that... What's your point?
So,
no, just what point are you trying to make? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, so, I mean, you read that, and from that perspective, the Chinese government has had a win. Because that is the only way that you, as a non-Chinese speaker or someone who's not in China and can get frame of reference from local Chinese people, that is the only way that you get any information on China. And China has no obligation to publish truth in any of that stuff, right?
No,
if you look at the Chinese economy as an example, right? For a long time, it was a very open secret that there's sort of three factors that influence the growth of China. One, they're starting from a very low base. Right? When everyone's on $1 a day, you go to $2 a day, you've magnified your economy 100%, but you're still from a very low base. So in the beginning, in the 80s and 90s, when they were accelerating, they were coming from a very low base. It doesn't deny that they made some great successes, but it is a very low base. And now they're getting up to kind of a middle class. Depending on the numbers you read, there's 125 million middle class households or something. So that's still pretty significant. That's the first one. The second one is, ultimately, if you want to be a modern Western-style democracy, right? I'm not saying that you have to have human rights and everything, but, the property-owning classes are your bread and butter, right? And the Chinese government, largely if you read economic policy and you read China watchers who have been in the game for a while, is kind of missing the boat. Because to this day, you can't actually own property in China. you buy a leasehold, right? So you own 5 houses, you're very successful, you've had a very good career. The Chinese government keeps moving the goalposts. So they used to be for 50 years, then they moved them to 70 years leaseholds, then they're probably going to move them to 99 years. But the Chinese government doesn't want to give up that control. Theoretically, they all still own the land. They own all the land. That's how they can build so many highways and everything, because they can turn up and just say, oh, we're cancelling your leasehold. In Australia or the US, if you wanted to build a new highway, you would have to fight 50,000 court battles. So it works in their favor in some regards, but it does weaken your middle class. Then you've got a population demographic issue because of the one-child policy. Their population bell curve does not look good. They've got a massively aging population, way faster than Western countries. So there's a few things going on, forces inside China that force them to make certain decisions. So the economy I've talked about, that has been accelerating. Since Tiananmen, there's kind of this like weird unspoken agreement, which is if you deliver economic prosperity, we won't ask questions about more freedoms, right? That's kind of existed, the Chinese people to the Chinese government. So, we know that you're controlling our internet. We know that you're doing this other stuff, but you're delivering this economic growth. If I'm in the same job, but the GDP is growing 10% a year, like next year, my money's worth 10% more. If I can buy a house, that's going to be worth more. So there was kind of this unspoken agreement. The CCP is getting concerned because they can't deliver that growth anymore, right? This is why the Chinese government spends probably, last time I saw the numbers, it was 75 billion, but it's probably way higher on internal security, right? The social credit score system, the cameras everywhere, all that stuff. That is a government that is concerned about the people's love for it, right? Successful, confident governments don't spend billions of dollars policing their own people.
Okay, so let's talk about the NSA and the FBI.
Okay.
What do they do?
I mean, the FBI, I think America, I acknowledged at the beginning of the call that like America is essentially an out of control oil tanker, right? Like they have so much money and so much power, but the captain of the ship, he owes money to the guys who invested in the ship. He can't really change course. He doesn't have the power to change course. Then you've got like the number 2 guy who's in the pocket of the oil company whose oil's on the ship. The Americans essentially are in problems. I mean, the FBI has been pretty corrupt as an organization going back to J. Edgar Hoover, right?
Absolutely.
And the Americans also have a little bit of a weird view of their own competence, right? The CIA is not a particularly competent organization. If you read the books I know you've read, right? We're talking about Legacy of Ashes, and they are not hugely competent. But they like to believe they're hugely competent. The Russians ran rings around them for years, right? And the Chinese
continue to.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say the Chinese run rings around them, and the Chinese are much more of a threat than the Russians are. I mean, Russia's population is shrinking, and their budget's like the size of Texas. So they can't be a big bad guy. Coming back, the NSA are essentially just running around, backdoor accessing Facebook and stuff like that. They're just trying to do
phone calls and emails. They're monitoring the US and the global population through the Five Eyes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think any
we've been
government
on this call for over half an hour.
Okay.
I'm still waiting for you to tell me specifically what I'm wrong about on China.
Okay.
You keep saying on Facebook, I'm wrong on China.
Okay.
Tell me what I'm wrong about, Liam.
Okay. I think that you think the Chinese are less belligerent than they are. That's the first one. And now we're going to talk about Xinjiang, right?
Well, last time less belligerent than they are.
No, I believe they're more belligerent.
In what ways? Yeah, tell me in what ways they're belligerent. Because one of the points I keep making when the media and the Australian government, the US government are trying to make China into this existential threat facing the human race is, tell me the number of countries that China has invaded since World War II.
Okay, but
can you give me a list?
China. So this is an important part, right? And there's a couple of really good books it explores. In the late 90s, Chinese military colonels put out a book called Unrestricted Warfare, right? And that book is freely available on Amazon. It's not a secret government document. That book essentially says we can never fight the US. Not for a long time. Not for 50 years at least can we fight them in a toe-to-toe battle. So what we need to do is really explore, today it's pretty commonly talked about. It's called hybrid warfare. The more recent sort of label for that is liminal warfare, which is by an Australian guy called David Kilcullen. And the idea is, if you think of a line, like a graph, everything up here is shooting guns at one another. And everything below the line is provocation political stuff, like cyber hacking, like political pressure, economic manipulation. All that stuff is below the line because that doesn't lead to a shooting war. So what you want to do if you're China is you just want to skate along, mostly under the line, pop up above the line to do one or two specific things that don't get you in a shooting war with the US. The best example of this in recent history was the Russians actually going into Crimea, right? Because the Russians realized everybody essentially has the same intelligence services, right? We've all got satellites. We've all got people listening on the internet. We're all intercepting phone calls. The piece that you can manipulate is politicians making decisions. So if Russia sends in its guys with no uniform logos on them, and they just say, oh, these are volunteers who want to fight for the Russian people in Crimea, and they kind of do all this misdirection, the average German politician doesn't feel motivated to make a quick decision. So you get a couple of weeks where you can actually do military maneuvers because you're not broadcasting. China is an expert at this, and they look at conflict in a much different way. They see economic conflict, political conflict, technology conflict, and military conflict essentially as the same thing, where we don't do that, right? Our military guys train and prepare for military conflicts. Our political guys worry about that. Our Reserve Bank or Fed worries about economic conflict. We don't really line those things up. I think China has, for the last 25 years, just slowly been moving out. I think the Belt and Road, that soft power.
Wait.
Okay.
What do you mean we don't do that? What do you think the Marshall Plan was?
No, I mean, we don't integrate our military, our economics, our politics, and our technology as effective. The Marshall Plan is a specific example.
Of course we do.
But we don't say,
of course
take our money or we're going to bomb the shit out of you. We don't say that.
Yes, we do. That's exactly what the US does. Have you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Yeah, I have read it. I wasn't 100% in agreement with it. I sort of felt it was a bit.
Whether or not you agree with it, he worked for the World Bank.
No, I think
whether or not it's 100% reliable
accurate.
As a source. Sorry, we got some lag. Go on.
Accurate. That was the word I was looking for. When I say I don't agree with it, I don't necessarily think it's accurate.
Sure, it may not be 100% accurate. Most things aren't. But, the basic premise, I think, is pretty hard to argue against, and I haven't read anybody refute it. The idea is that, and we've got tons of examples of where this has actually happened, so it's not hard to believe that a large amount of it is true. But the way the US works is they go into a country and say, give us access to your natural resources and to your markets, give our corporations access to all of that. If you say no, we will overthrow the government, usually using soft power to begin with. We'll fund your political competition. And if we can't do that, we will destabilize your country and then fund and support through our media and the CIA and various other, and our allies, your competitors, your political competitors. And if we can't do that, that's when we'll come up with an excuse to invade, like Iraq in 2003. So, I mean, I think that's pretty understandable. I
agree with that.
Legacy of Ash's book, Tim Weiner has, I think, 70 countries that the US has interfered with their democracy since the end of World War II. And that book was written, I think, nearly 20 years ago. So the list of countries since then, that didn't include Iraq and Afghanistan and what they've been doing more recently in Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera. So The US has been doing that since World War II. I'm still waiting to see how I'm wrong about China.
Okay, so I think the Chinese realize that they can't fight a shooting war. I do think that they are more integrated in the way that they approach it, right? There's a book called Chaos Under Heaven by a guy called Josh Rogan, no relation to Joe Rogan, but it's quite recent. I think I shared an article to he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, but he has a very interesting sort of little story regarding when the Chinese and Huawei went into Ethiopia, right? And this is it illuminates what I'm talking about. So if you're a dictator in Africa, the US, Mike Pompeo turns up and he goes, don't buy Huawei. And the dictator goes, well, I kind of want new phones and a new telecommunications network. What's your offer? And they go, we don't have an offer, just don't buy Huawei. And he goes, oh, well, okay. I was kind of hoping for something a bit more. Then the Chinese turn up and they go, do you want 5G? Do you want phones? And the guy goes, well, yeah. And they go, do you want a house in the Bahamas? And do you want $50 million in your bank account? And the guy goes, yes, I do want all those things. So they turn up, they charge less than the Americans because the Chinese eat some of those costs, the government eat. So you pay 30 cents on the dollar to get yourself a 5G network. Then they deliver phones. Maybe there's a deal where they give away a shitload of phones, or the phones are very cheap. You get your phone, and on your phone there's an app installed, and it's a poker app, and it's got $100 credit on it. And you're like, oh wow, I can play online poker. And so you're playing online poker, and you win some, you lose some, but then at some point you link either your phone account to your poker, or you link your bank account. I assume it's probably phone accounts, and you're doing prepaid credit in Africa. And then the moment you're in debt, there's a knock on your door, and the local Chinese gang, not government, not a company, like a gang, like a criminal enterprise is there to collect that money. So if you think about that from the very top, there's government support of Huawei and 5G networks and the phone providers, China Mobile. Then there's the guys who actually go to build that stuff. That's essentially Chinese low-level slave labor, right? Those guys are not earning very much, but they're still Chinese. Chinese government's creating jobs for itself. Then you go down to the very bottom level, and somewhere there, they're integrated with Chinese criminal syndicates. That's top-down vertical integration that Apple would be proud of. I don't necessarily think the US government does that level of integration. I'm sure that there's meetings with the CIA, some guy talking to the mafia back in the 60s. Sure, that happened. But they probably don't vertically integrate like Apple does. Like, here's our product, here's our platform, here's our software, here's the criminal guys who are going to kill the hackers who try and hack our system. That level of vertical integration, I think, is hard to understand in the West.
No, except it's exactly the same, except instead of the triads, we've got Mark Zuckerberg, who has his Facebook installed on your phone and then is leaking all of your personal information or selling it to people illegally and denying it for years, and then has to testify in front of Congress and says, okay, yeah, we did do that. I'm sorry, we'll do much better next time, and then continues to do all sorts of crazy shit.
Yeah, but do you feel that Mark Zuckerberg and the US government are like hand in glove? I mean, I feel that occasionally they work in line with one another, occasionally they work at odds with one another, and occasionally Congress calls him in to ask questions. So they clearly are not 100% aligned.
I don't think he's on the payroll, but I don't think there's a great deal of friction there either. Anyway, that's beside the point. So you're telling me that criminal gangs are putting apps on phones. Why does this make China... I still asked the question earlier, how many countries has China invaded since the end of World War II?
Well, the Chinese are not going to invade countries because that's a very American way of looking at the world. The same way as Australia hasn't invaded many countries without the Americans asking us to invade them since World War II. The only one I think we've done that they haven't done is East Timor, which technically
East Timor,
we were asked
which
to
we
go
did for the
by
gas.
some people.
No, by some people. We did it for the gas.
Yeah.
Well, everyone's kind of us. There's always two sides to every domestic conflict. There's always going to be somebody. That's like the Americans saying they were asked to go to Iraq by Shalabi, who was the guy that put the whole thing together. Yeah, of course. There's always going to be someone who's going to ask you, particularly if you pay them enough money to ask you. But my point is, how many countries has the US media, the US government, Australian government, are positioning China as this existential threat to humanity that we need to be ready to go to war with, because it's this Cold War rhetoric that bugs the fuck out of me. It's like, oh, the
Okay, so
Soviets are coming to take your children from the cribs. China doesn't invade countries. The US has invaded directly or indirectly using either hard power or soft power or allies. They get
mm,
Israel to do it over 80 countries since World War II. Why is it that China's the one I should be scared of
oh no, 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 no.
when the
Okay,
US
I'm
literally has a track record of doing it for 70 years and they continue to do it unabated?
no. So I'm not an apologist
Is
for the
my question.
US. Yeah, I'm not an apologist for the US. So I mean, there's more qualified people than me to talk about that. The US is the US. But if you just step back in a hypothetical world where the US implodes in 50 years and someone has to step into that role, right? If that was China, I'd just be concerned about the types of freedoms that we take for granted, you know, freedom for privacy, freedom to have some say in how your government is selected, freedom to have contrarian opinions. Those things would all go away if the Chinese are in a dominant position. That's where I'm really trying to get to, because they don't really
You're,
care
but
about
you're,
those things at all.
are you literally talking about China taking over, say, the Australian government, or just
No, I don't think
you
they
think
would
that
take
if
them. I don't think they would take
so,
them over like.
how would they interfere with our domestic legal system?
Well, I think that we're seeing that right now, right? Like all the stuff that's going on. This is probably the beginning of it, what's happening in Australia now. And what, for international listeners, Australia, for a long time, over the last 10, 15 years, we sold everything we have to China, right? Like iron ore, timber, meat, wine. That was our cash cow. We just sent wine that you couldn't sell in Australia. We put a made in Australia label and we sent it to China and the Chinese bought it. And we didn't think about, well, is this going to ever stop? This was our essentially bonanza. Now the Chinese are like, actually, you know what? Fuck you. It started off about 5, 6 years ago with Rio Tinto, right? There was a Chinese guy who was representing Rio Tinto who got arrested for corruption. That's the business. That's the way that business has probably worked since the beginning of time in China, right? Backhanders, you make $10 million commission, you give me $1 million on the table. And the government at some point probably got that taste, but they wanted to make a political point, so they arrested that guy. Now, like wine is off the table, meat is off the table. This is economic pressure, which is probably pretty similar to how the fiasco with the United Fruit Company in South America started back in the 50s, right? Oh, suddenly you
Sure.
can't sell those bananas and you can't do that, and the government's getting stuff. The other thing the Chinese government do is Confucian institutes. The University of Queensland near you is like one of the major culprits, right? When, I was involved in a Hong Kong protest in a very sort of ancillary function. I went to a few and I have friends who are quite active. Um, when Hong Kongers protested at University of Queensland, and it was a very peaceful protest, they held up signs and said, don't, democracy for Hong Kong. Mainland Chinese students turned up and like beat the shit out of them, right? And the University of Queensland didn't really intervene because as soon as the stuff kicked off on social media, the language of the mainland Chinese students used like modern day political correctness. We feel threatened and insecure about these people who are attacking our worldview. They used all that kind of modern sort of leftist university type conversation to look like the victim, right? Meanwhile, the university couldn't really do anything because they've taken millions of dollars to set up a Confucian Institute and they are funded largely by Chinese money. So they were essentially morally bankrupt. Again, going back to Chaos Under Heaven, the Josh Rogan book, he explores like 100 American universities that have Confucian institutes. One university in Texas, I think it's in Austin, essentially said no, right? They had a bunch of Chinese academics who were writing, objectively about Chinese policy. And then the Confucian Institute said, like, we'll put $100 million into university to build a thing and run more courses. But we just want sign off, like editorial control of all the research that comes out of your university. So that's the Chinese play, right? So
Sure,
that's what they would do in Australia.
but
Yeah.
but dude, Julian Assange isn't in prison because he criticised China.
No. Yeah.
Why is he? He's in prison because he exposed the US. So the US has been, my point is that the
Is he
US
not
has
in
been doing
prison
this
because our government is a bit morally bankrupt, right? Like, honestly, we've had what, three
because
presidents? We've had three prime ministers
because
since he was arrested, right?
yeah, because we're locked into the US economic bloc and the Chinese economic bloc, and we're
I
trying to balance the
disagree.
two. But we bow down to the US. We won't do anything to upset the US. We haven't done anything to upset the US since Gough Whitlam pulled us out of Vietnam and threatened to shut down US military bases here, and got
I
kicked out of
kind of
government.
disagree to a certain extent. I think if any of our last three prime ministers had just said to the US, like, we have your back, dude. Have you not noticed? 60 years of us kissing your ass. Like, he's an Australian citizen, and we're going to take him back to Australia and try him. Like, and the next time you got a war, you know we've got you. I actually don't think the US would say no. Honestly, I don't. Like, one guy, do you really think George Bush gave a shit? Do you really think Trump gave a shit? Do you think Barack Obama would have given? If Australia had said this is an issue for us, he's an Australian citizen, like, we're going to bring him back, whatever, he'll serve whatever he's already got, and we'll have a trial in Australia or whatever. That would be the situation. If he hasn't broken Australian law, we're not going to charge him. I actually don't think the US would have a significant issue with that. Honestly, don't think they would
Okay,
risk
but
their relationship with us.
either way, it's the US government that trying to get him extradited to the US. It's the US government that have got him stuck in whatever the name of the prison is, Balmore, I can't
Belmarsh.
remember what the name of it is over there. Belmarsh,
Belmarsh.
thanks. My point is that all of this stuff that you're saying the Chinese
Mm.
do, I accept that they do all of that stuff, but the US has been doing all of that stuff way longer than the Chinese have done it, and at a much grander scale.
Okay,
So I'm not
let's
sure
talk about
why that makes
genocide. Let's
China
talk about
worse
genocide then.
than. Okay.
Um, so there's a really good in Australia. There's a really good woman on Twitter you should follow, Xu Hong, right? She's a Chinese. I think her name's Linda Xu, Australian name on Twitter. So she's a Chinese girl, and she's like critical of the Chinese government, and she has really excellent conversations about how the Chinese government have fucked her over, right? Like her family in China getting visits, lots of pressure getting applied. But she recently put something out about Xinjiang and, looking at how badly fucked that situation is. And I probably was hesitant. I've been to Xinjiang years ago. At that point in time, there was very clear lines. Like, we were in the Han Chinese area in the hotel. We said we're walking to that part of town. They go, don't go there. It's super dangerous. That's where the Uyghurs live. But as white guys, actually, it wasn't a problem. We had a great time. And we ended up in a Uyghur bar, and it was great, and they loved us. But, like, there was even friction then. This is like 2006, something like that, right? 2007. So even back then, if we just look at the last 2 years, right? I know on a couple of episodes ago, you were talking about the Uyghur genocide, and, there's a weird German-American guy who's one of the main drum bangers.
Adrian Zenz. Yeah.
Yeah. So he definitely looks dodgy, right? I'm with you on that. But if we just look at this latest research that Linda Xu put out on her Twitter, in the last 2 years, in some particular areas, since 2017, the birth rate in Xinjiang has dropped from about 125%, the national birth rate, to less than 80%.
We've covered, dude. We've covered all this before on this show and drilled down into why those numbers are.
Yeah, but this is why I'm talking about it, because this is new research. So specifically, if you split areas that have high concentrations of Uyghurs versus low concentrations of Uyghurs, the numbers get very suspicious. If you look at comparatively around Kashgar, which is mainly a Uyghur area, we're talking like an 85% reduction in 2 years. Do you know that when the Khmer Rouge were in Cambodia, at the height of that genocide, which everyone agrees is a genocide or was a genocide, the birth rate dropped by about 28%. So when you talked about it, you said, they're kind of, they've obviously, those guys had a higher birth rate. They've got some systems in control. We are talking about a significant change that cannot be explained by condoms being given out. We are talking about a very clear plan by the CCP to, Tibet and Xinjiang are both.
Hold on. So what we talked about on episode 90 back in March. Wasn't just condoms given out, although that's part of it. It's that my understanding, and correct me if this is wrong, but this is the research that I did for that show. Uyghur families were exempted from the one-child policy up until recently.
Yeah,
So in
but like a
2000,
lot of people were exempted from the one-child policy. If you're an agricultural family in China, you're allowed to have a second child. Lots of people broke the rules. China is. It's very important to understand that China is a very big country, and they have 26 provinces and 54 minorities, right? So the Han
yeah.
Chinese is 89%, and then the 10% is, there's Hui Muslims, there's Uyghurs, there's Tibetans, right? There's a bunch of different cultures in there. But in general, if you
So
look at the Uyghur decline versus those guys' decline, it's pretty significant. It's pretty stark.
so the background that I got on this was yes, the one child policy was applied to the Han population for decades, wasn't applied to the Uyghurs along with other non-Han minorities. In 2017, Xinjiang's regional government ended the exemption on the old child limits for Uyghurs. And some Uyghurs were having two, three, some were having 9 or 10 children. And even Adrian Zenza's acknowledged that in his writings. So, yeah, if you have a population that's having 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 children a family, and you enforce a one-child policy or a two-child policy, it's going to reduce the population growth. That makes total sense.
So if we look at Tibet and Hong Kong, and we consider Xinjiang from that perspective, right? So Tibet had a population of native Tibetans of around 4 million. I think that's the number. I mean, I could be slightly off, but that was my understanding. Xinjiang has a population of about 12 million Uyghurs, right? And Hong Kong originally had a population of about 5 to 6 million native Hong Kongers. China has pursued the same strategy in each of those three places. The first approach is that they did this in Tibet first, is what you do is you create jobs in that area that if you had the same job somewhere else in China, you would get paid more to be in Tibet. So Han Chinese, by virtue of that economic incentive, move there, right? So what you do is you dilute that native local population. So then, in a couple of years, and the Chinese play a long game. You've discussed that before. So Tibet, in the 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s, you would frequently meet Chinese guys who had done 2 years in Tibet, right? They were working in a factory. They were a taxi driver. They were making 500 Australian dollars. They went to Tibet. They were making 1,000, right? It's very common. Once you get those people in, you have to build services for those people. So that's banks, hotels. Those are all Han-operated and owned businesses. Then slowly you just encroach on the rights of the local people. You just chisel away. Then you build services. Then you go, well, we need police force to police those people. And then you kind of implement public security is the euphemism they call in China. So that's cameras, facial recognition. They had that, the first city that really experimented widely in that was not in Tibet, not in Xinjiang, not in Hong Kong. It was the city of Shenzhen, right? You can go back and read Wired magazines from 10, 15 years ago, China pumped money into Western tech companies and Chinese tech companies to work on facial recognition. There was Israelis, ex-Mossad companies making millions of dollars in China. So they built the system, they tested it in Shenzhen. It was the most highly cameraed city in the world. Then once they optimized it, they just pick that as a system in a box and they drop it in Xinjiang. They can facially recognize you as a Uyghur versus Han Chinese on the street, right? So that is an open air prison where you're monitored at all times. And they did the same thing in Tibet. And they are doing the same thing in Hong Kong, right? What they did in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong had that farcical kind of coverage of being democratic, was they increased the high net worth people first. If you've got a certain amount of money and you're going to buy property, you get fast track to have a PR in China, permanent residency. Then you get in, you're there for X amount of time, you get a passport, then you can vote. So they push the population to 8 million, and that allows them to influence those elections because they've now got 4 million people who support the CCP rather than the 2 million that used to exist. So slowly what you do is you drive the people who actually live there and should have some sort of self-determination, you drive them
Should
into
they?
a minority. Isn't that? Isn't, I mean, are we not in agreement that a fundamental kind of whoever lives in the land probably should have some self-determination over what happens to it?
But
I mean, can we
yeah,
agree on
sure.
that?
But Hong Kong is part of China.
Is it? I
Yeah,
mean, is it really? No, no. I mean,
yeah.
this is the
Since the British
Chinese
handed it
narrative.
back, since the
Okay, so
British handed it back, it's part of China.
okay, so I
Is
think
it?
that
Is
this
it
needs
not?
to be explored. Okay, there was no other deal that they could do, the Hong Kong people, at that point in time. That's not the deal they wanted. Okay, is
The British
Taiwan
had a
part of
lease on it
China?
for.
Is Taiwan part of
Yes,
China? Yeah, but
it
Mao
is.
Zedong offered it
Yeah.
to the UK. Mao Zedong offered Hong Kong forever in perpetuity to the British in the 60s. He was like, dude, give me bonds and guns, give me a bunch of money, and you can have it forever. That was a deal that's like freely available. You can look it up. I mean, I'll send you a link if you want to. Like Mao Zedong. So for all this thing that the Western countries peeled off these parts of China and China now wants them back, that's not really the case. Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Communist state, he essentially was like, fuck it, we'll just give it away. Give me the money. I need the money now. And the British were like, we don't think it's worth that much. So they never took it, right?
So there was
But
no
now,
deal. So Hong Kong, the lease
yeah,
expired in
mm-hmm,
99, 2000. So it
97.
became part of 97. It became part of China.
Yeah,
There's no
but the
debating that.
Chinese,
So what's
no, but I mean, the Hong Kong local people kind of thought that the British government were going to give them passports, but then the British government at that point in time under John Major was like, we don't really want 5 million Chinese people moving to the UK. So they created a whole new system of passport, right? I spoke to a guy who worked in an embassy in Beijing, and he was like, that was the greatest betrayal that the British government has perpetrated in 100 years. You know, that betrayal of taxpayers and citizens. So the Hong Kong people were like, oh, we might get to go and live in the UK. And then they kind of got royally fucked, right? The fact that they got fucked by the British and by the Chinese doesn't make it any less a fucking, right? So, yes, that's right. It is part of China on paper. But, like, do you
okay?
think
So it's
Scotland,
part of China.
but do you think Scotland is going to have a referendum? Like, have you seen the news recently? Do you think Scotland's going to have a referendum to leave the UK?
Oh, well, I hope they do. I've been hoping
And
that
do
for
you think
decades.
if they vote yes, do you think the UK
Hmm.
will send in troops?
Fuck, I don't know, man. Depends if Boris Johnson's still
I
PM or not. I don't know.
don't think they can do it. I honestly don't think the British Army is going to drive troops into Scotland to like. I just don't think they've got it in them because they
They
are
did it.
part of it.
They did it. They did it to the Falklands.
That was in the 80s. And that was before the EU. That was before the EU. I don't think in this climate they would do that. I
Maybe
think
not.
things
Maybe
have
you're right.
changed.
But the bottom line is Hong Kong
It's,
is part of China. Taiwan, most countries around the world recognize that Taiwan is part of China. And China has been very patient, not invading Taiwan for the reason, like as you said earlier, I
okay.
don't think China has wanted, this is the same true with Russia and the Soviet Union during Stalin's years. We talked about this on the Cold War show the other day when Khrushchev took over. He said, Stalin was terrified of a war with the United States because he knew that they would lose. They weren't ready for it. I don't think China's wanted a war. I don't think Russia wants a war. I don't think anyone really wants a war with the US for obvious reasons. So they've been very
So there is
patient,
no
biding their
contract with
time.
Taiwan. There is no contract with Taiwan. So I'm going to disagree with you. There is no contract like there is for Hong Kong.
Contract.
There was a legal document signed by the UK handing China back, Hong Kong back to
Hong
China.
Kong
There was a
back. Yeah,
document.
but
There's a document.
Taiwan was never separated from China like Hong Kong was. It's always been part
Yeah.
of China.
No. This is a very grey area, and I think that you're going off the actual track. China is a 5,000-year-old entity. At various times, it was really big. At various times, it was very small. If we just say the rule is anytime some guy with an Australian flag was in a country, that means that country is for all perpetuity now part of Australia. That means we own Papua New Guinea. By your logic, we own Papua New Guinea. America owns a shitload more of the world than you. I mean, they own Europe. That's
Well, they
essentially
do.
your logic. No,
Well,
but
they
you're
do
saying that
effectively own Europe. No, I'm
They
saying
like,
when the KBR went to Taiwan, who gave them the rights to take Taiwan and declare it
well,
the Republic of China?
they were the actual government of China.
No, they weren't. They've been defeated by the communists in a
But
civil war.
a defeat in a war does not nullify an election or your government situation. Like in Africa, when rebels in Sierra Leone run into the city and like machine gun a bunch of dudes and seize the city, that is not a transfer of power. They have to be
So what about the
recognized as a so you're
what about
saying
the
basically we
what
should
about
have
the American
guns.
Revolution? So Britain still owns the United States then?
No, your logic is that. Your logic is basically anyone with guns, if they
No,
can
because
take it, they have a
there was a
claim. They still have a
revolution.
claim. But you saying
Well,
they
how
still
did
have a claim. The Chinese don't have any claim to Taiwan right now. The Communist
really?
Party.
So the
They're not
CCP
in
is
it.
not the government of China.
No, they're the government of China, but that part of China that they govern does not include Taiwan. Like, it doesn't. The people in Taiwan have voted unanimously to vote against anti-CCP parties. So I would say self-determination is probably the rule.
Okay.
And then let's talk about the UN. You posted on Facebook around this same conversation we're having that, if China took Taiwan, if they invaded, that would be up to the UN to recognize, right? That would be the UN's decision. Okay, for the start, I think we can both agree the UN is highly incompetent, right? They've done nothing for the Palestinians in 70 years, 60 years. And Taiwan's not even in the UN
No,
because at some point,
I wouldn't say the UN is incompetent. I'd say that the veto system that was set up in the Security Council is flawed, broken. It's
I
broken.
mean, if we sort of go back to political theory and we go with any sort of rule and law is essentially the state controls the use of force, right? When you get arrested crossing the street, you go with a policeman because if you don't, he will beat the shit out of you because he's a representative of the state and he can use violence, right? So China has the right to apply violence to Taiwan. So you're essentially saying that that's the policy, right? If the UK could get back into America, they had the right to apply violence. That would be fine. The UN does not have the ability to apply violence effectively. I mean, they haven't won any wars. Even Bosnia, which is considered, probably that peacekeeping in the 90s under Clinton, that was essentially the US. The UN is not great at peacekeeping, and that would mean that essentially they're incompetent and like a failed organization.
Well, yeah, I mean, they are a failed organisation. I agree with that. The idea of the UN, I think, is incredibly important and incredibly valid. The execution of it has been terrible, but that's been by design to a large extent by the major powers that form the Security Council. Anyway,
Yeah.
dude, we're an hour and 7. We should probably go. I got to go to the blood bank and give blood. Can you summarize for me the ways in which I'm wrong on China? So next time on Facebook,
Okay.
when you just say you're wrong on China, I'll be
Yeah.
able to translate that into what you mean.
So I think that you, without that context that we talked about earlier about where the Chinese government's coming from and that fact that it's a warlord state, without that context, I think you're wrong on Xinjiang specifically. I think that is a genocide, right? If you compare it to the Khmer Rouge or anything else, that's a genocide. It's a calculated move to reduce the efficacy of the local people to make sure that territory stays attached to China, right? And they did the same thing in Tibet.
Well, they're trying to
Tibet is,
prevent a secession. Yeah. The
yeah,
same
but
reason Lincoln invaded the South, man. It's
yeah, but
exactly the same scenario.
it's 200. That's 200 years ago, right? Like, so let's
Yeah,
just
but
keep in
it's
mind that the
morally
world may have
it
moved
doesn't
on.
matter. The US still morally justifies that as being valid. I
Okay,
mean,
well, in that case, Mongolia owns most of the world then. If time limits don't matter, Mongolia owns the world.
I'm
Genghis
talking
Khan
about
conquered everything.
the
So
the
there is a
moral
time
justif
limit.
the
There is a
moral
time limit.
justification. Oh, yeah, there should be a time limit on certain things, but I'm talking about countries preventing secession is something that's universally recognised and
Okay.
exercised upon. And the US, like Look, I would argue that what Lincoln did, I do argue, and one day I'm going to do a series on this, that what Lincoln did was wrong.
Mm.
But the point is that he did it, and the US generally still support his decision to do that as being the right decision, that
So
and the responsible decision.
yeah, I'm not going to argue with you on that. But so Xinjiang is essentially a continuation of Tibet. Tibet, there's a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons that people don't think about is actually water, right? The Chinese looked at the Himalayas and they went, water starts at the top of the mountain and rolls down. If we control this side, that secures our access to water for a long time. The Mekong and a bunch of these rivers that run through Southeast Asia come out of that area. So China is thinking about resource acquisition and control strategically, as well as the
Sure.
territory. So Tibet, no one really kicked up a stink, so they're just replicating that in Xinjiang. And then I would say you look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong, the Chinese have now essentially bankrupt themselves because the contract that they did sign, the legal document when they took handover was two systems, one country, right? So that was supposed to be the same to 2047. They've essentially wiped that off the floor, off the table,
Yeah.
right? So that contract that they signed is no longer valid. Um, Xi Jinping has made himself dictator for life, which I think you can acknowledge to me. Any country at any point in history, when a guy puts himself in for life, it generally indicates pretty significant authoritarian tendencies and dictatorship. I mean, tell me a democratic leader or a benevolent autocrat who's got in and ruled for life. You know, even in ancient Rome, when they started putting the guys in for life, that was not a good sign, right? Xi Jinping wants to rival Mao, and I think by wanting to rival Mao, he has a limited window to clarify the Taiwan issue. Because the longer
Okay,
it
but
goes on,
you're
yep,
talking about domestic issues here. I mean, and I
I
don't
don't.
disagree. I don't disagree that Xi Jinping's made himself dictator for life. Whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing is another conversation. But tell me again, summarize what I'm wrong about on
So
China when I say that
I talk about. Xinjiang, I think, is a proper genocide, and I think that
you think they're really deliberately killing the entire population or a large
I
percentage
don't
of the
think they're.
population.
I think that they're doing the same as they did the Tibetans, which is not like they're taking them out and firing, squatting them. Although I'm pretty sure they did do that a little bit. They're through various measures, re-education camps, forced sterilizations, reducing the number of children. They are breeding them out of existence,
I
and
don't
it's
think there's
probably a
any
50.
evidence of. I don't think there's any evidence of forced sterilizations.
I will again. The Josh Rogan book does have an example, and I will share it with you. I'll share the link. I'll take a photo of that page. It's not
And
long.
we've pointed out on this show that the people that Adrian Zenz and the media are putting forwards as the spokespeople for the treatment of people generally, particularly women in Xinjiang, are very problematic in terms of their. So it's not necessarily saying that they are lying, but their stories have changed dramatically over time, and they're being funded by Uyghur separatist movements that are in turn being funded by the CIA. So there are
Yeah,
genuine
that's a grey
credibility
area.
issues that I
I
have
agree with. I
with those
mean, the
stories.
Dalai Lama's organization used to take money from the CIA. I don't deny that. That's a pretty old trope, right? So yeah, I understand that. I think that there's legitimate witnesses who have been pretty badly fucked over by that situation, and you can find them if you look. There's probably some that are being the drums being banged. So I think that's two different issues. Hong Kong, that was a pretty bad situation. I was there during those protests, right? And I saw what they did to 14-year-old kids who just are worried about the future direction of their country, like intentionally targeting like 14, 15-year-old kids with violence, right? Smashing up first aid tents, like brutal stuff. The US, if your counter to that is, the US Lives Matter riots, I agree with you. They were also terrible. I do not think it's I do not think it's impossible to hold two. These are equally terrible examples, right? The Black Lives Matter
Sure,
police
I agree with
overreaction.
you.
Hong
Yeah,
Kong was really bad, right? Especially because it's in breach of a legal contract that they signed with the UK when they took control of that company, which was supposed to give the Hong Kong people some sort of autonomy. So in that situation, I think that that's pretty bad. And I think Taiwan is going to get bad too, because I think that the election not that long ago when the Taiwanese voted back in the person who's pretty anti-China, right? I think Xi Jinping's got 4 to 8 years to resolve the Taiwan issue. His demographic curve actually means he's going to have too many old people. His economic trajectory is going to slow down. The US is now pivoting to look after Taiwan and pivoting to the Pacific in general. The Philippines are getting pissed off with him. So he has a limited window to act.
Okay. So,
So I think
final
you're wrong on
question.
Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang.
Do you think we should go to war with China?
No. I think there's a fundamental thing with China that many people overlook, and there's a book by a guy called Peter Zehan, which is called Disunited Nations. You know, in real estate, they say location, location, location. And in the case of military conflict, China does not have a good location. They have to fight out to get to the oceans. They have to come through their first island chain and secure the Pacific, which they can never do. So all the resources that they consume, the most important one being food, if the US really wanted to, without going to war, they could just stop all the food ships going to China, and that would cause massive problems. China is not food sufficient.
That is going to war. You know, economic warfare, blocking
Well, actually, that's
trade,
piracy.
shipping is war,
That's piracy.
which is an act of war.
Yeah, but who polices the international shipping lanes? The US does, and we all essentially don't acknowledge that. Like all of the international trade that's developed post World War II is all underpinned by the US Navy, right? Because Australia couldn't capture an oil tanker in the Persian Gulf if the Iranians took it. We don't have a Navy to do that. The US underwrites that. Blank checkbook. They protect international trade. The Chinese couldn't do that.
They protect US trade.
And actually, they kind of protect most of the trade except the people that they're pissed off with. They protect our trade.
That aren't part. Yeah, they protect US trade, which means the American trading bloc. Anyone outside of that, Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, fuck them.
But they don't really attack, other than Iran and occasionally Russia when they get very close to like Biffo. They rarely they don't go to like Ecuador and seize its ships in the Pacific. Venezuela, right? They didn't get on with Hugo Chavez, but they weren't seizing his ships in the middle of the Pacific. Like, it didn't get to that point. So even if you're not a member
they put him under economic sanctions, which is the same thing, effectively.
Yeah, but I don't remember any stories.
You're destroying a population through economic sanctions, economic warfare.
Yeah. Well, I agree that economy is warfare. I think the Chinese are essentially pursuing it in a different way, but they're pursuing the same approach. And if you are scathing of the US for pursuing that approach, then I don't think China gets a pass for pursuing the same principle. Right?
No, I've never said China gets a pass. I've said that I don't think they're this existential evil that the US and our government and the media are trying to paint them out to be, to justify what I think is just increasing industrial military complex budgets by coming up with another big bad. I don't think they're any better. I don't think they're any worse. I think, they've done some economic miracles. They've pulled 850 million people out of poverty. I don't think they're a pariah state. I also don't think they're an angelic state either.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think everything that they're doing, like at the beginning of COVID a year ago, my forecast was that if I was China, I said back then, like a year and a bit ago, if I was Xi Jinping, I'd be rolling out the Chinese Marshall Plan around the world. If this is before, I understood that the Western governments were just going to use modern monetary theory to fund their economies through it, which was an amazing thing to see happen. But if the economies of the world had collapsed and remained collapsed for the last 12 months, I expected China to come out and roll out the big bucks and go, well, we can give you money, but here's what we'll need in return: political loyalty, loyalty in the UN, trade deals, et cetera, which is essentially what the Marshall Plan was.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Just to summarize 1 minute, I think that's a good example. You sort of brought coronavirus in it. We didn't touch on it, but, what do you think is the most likely cause of the coronavirus? Like, where did it come from? See, my gut feeling, having lived in China, is middle management incompetence is a worldwide problem, right? Everywhere. In China, I honestly really think, I don't think it was malicious. I think it's much more likely that gain-of-function stuff done in a lab in Wuhan walked out the door because of poor controls. And the Chinese government is hiding that, right? Not they're like, it's a conspiracy theory.
There's no evidence for that, It's possible, but there's no evidence for it.
It's more it's all circumstantial evidence, but I think it's more likely that happened than a pangolin got bitten by a bat and walked a really long distance to spread a virus. That seems unlikely too. But just to come back to the
Well,
point
there's
and sort of,
evidence now that the COVID virus was existed in different parts of the world before it was reported in China.
that you're
So I
talking
think
about the
it's,
frozen Norwegian fish theory, as it's called.
yeah, one of those. Yeah, I don't know, man. There's weird stories coming out. I don't know if
The
they're
Chinese government
legitimate
is
or not.
good at propaganda, and for them, all
Sure,
they really need
sure.
is people to just not be clear on what's happening. But I guess coming back to
Yeah,
my point, just to close out, I think China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Xinjiang are the three areas that I have a concern with, and I think in general that China's a great place. Chinese people are awesome. I think the CCP essentially has never been in a competitive political race like democratic parties are in Australia, where you've got an opposition slagging off all the time. So I think that they act like a bully just because of the environment in which they have grown up in, right?
yeah. Well, but these are all domestic issues that you're talking about. Essentially, Taiwan, you might say, is not a domestic issue, but Chinese certainly consider it a domestic issue. And as I said before, most countries in the UN consider Taiwan to be part of China. So these are domestic issues. Why does that make them an existential threat that we should be going to war with? That's my only issue,
No, no, no.
is the way that they're being
I
painted
don't
out
agree with war.
as, okay. So when you say I'm wrong on China, the main criticism that I have of the way that China is depicted at the moment is that they're this existential threat. They're the new Soviet Union that are going to come and take over the world, and we need to go to war with them. I just call bullshit on that. I don't think anyone really believes that anyway. I don't think Biden wants to go to war with China. I don't think Scott Morrison wants to go to war with China. I think it's all bullshit, smoke and mirrors to justify military spending and to use as a negotiation point in trade deals, and it's fucking it's backfiring on us in a major way. Scott Morrison's made a big play here that's backfiring on Australia. He's going to verbal war with our number one trading partner, which
Yeah,
I think he's already starting to regret. But yeah.
I mean, I think in that regard, we don't need to go to war. But if they do keep pushing into places like the Philippines and South China Sea, there is probably some justification for us being quite strong in our resistance to them and saying that is not acceptable.
Sure, saying that is not acceptable and doing it through the United Nations, I have no problem with. Doing it through the UNSC, I have no problem with. Problem, of course, is that China is on the UNSC, so the UNSC needs to be fixed,
Overhauled? Yeah, yeah, I agree.
overhauled. Yeah, we need to get rid of the veto system. I've been saying this forever. That is the big problem. This whole thing that the US is the global police is bullshit. That's not what Roosevelt wanted. And it's not a good thing for the world. All of the focus shouldn't be on China's the bad guy. It should be on let's fix the Security Council so it does what it was designed to do in the original conception by Roosevelt towards the end of World War II, which is to prevent, to the best of its ability, global conflict. The same as the World Health Organization themselves are saying they need to be fixed because they weren't able to respond to the pandemic effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the way wars start, though, just because I say that we probably shouldn't go to war doesn't mean I don't think we will. I think all these bellicose actions of people sailing around the South China Sea and ships getting close to one another, like that's how wars start, right? Some guy sails too close to a Chinese Coast Guard vessel and he hits them and a missile is fired, or a US guy shoots down a Chinese plane. This could happen. And I think that the Chinese posturing, and to a certain extent the US posturing, the US is trying to look supportive to its allies and to Taiwan to a certain extent. And I think, that's where there's room for negotiation. But I don't think either of these two parties is really, really looking for that right now.
The US doesn't traditionally, post World War II, doesn't go to war with countries that can defend themselves. That's rule
Yeah,
number one of American
100%.
military policy.
100% agree. Yeah, the Americans have not fought an army that could actually hurt them since World War II.
And China doesn't go to war since World War II. China doesn't invade countries. The US invades countries all the time. weaker countries that it can push around. China doesn't do that, doesn't have a tradition of doing that, doesn't have a track record of doing that. And I think they all know. I mean, it's the same reason why the Cold War never developed into an all-out war between the Soviets and the US. They're just not dumb enough. No one wants to have half their population wiped out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I think, ultimately there is a lot of similarities between the US and China, right? They're both the big kid in the room, right? They're both massive. People from Australia, people from the UK, other countries, we tend to be fairly internationally aware, right? Geography, we can look at a map and go, name 80% of these countries because we're a small nation and a lot of the shit that happens in the world happens offshore. But Americans are very myopic. They don't know that much about what's going on outside. Chinese are very the same, right? Broadly speaking. I don't want to be racist and I don't want to shortchange anyone, but it's things that I've noticed. They tend to really feel that they have some sort of manifest destiny, both those countries. They tend to feel that they're a big kid in the room and that they're a superpower or they're becoming a superpower. And I think that's unfortunate because two kids that are the same and both bullies probably going to end up in a fight at some point, right?
Yeah, maybe. Let's hope not. But I appreciate you coming on and having a conversation. It's good fun.
No worries, mate. Thanks very much. Good to talk to you.
You're now our official, one of our official China experts on the bullshit filter. Will
I don't know about that. I'm a bit too humble. But if there's anything I can help with, I'm involved.
I'll call you up every time we're talking about China. Have a good day, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
See you, Cam.